Sarah Ferguson stood beside Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor during a discreet christening appearance, smiling, leaving early, and saying nothing. But while they faded from view, a wave of allegations surged back into focus. Testimonies from former aides speak not only of Andrew's temper but of his obsession with ritual, requiring vows, enforcing strange punishments, and cultivating an atmosphere of submission. These weren't harmless quirks. They shaped a workplace defined by fear and fueled by his need to dominate beyond the public eye. The contrast is jarring. Behind-the-scenes accounts of Andrew's behavior, set against carefully managed outings, form a narrative that's less about scandal and more about systemic avoidance. Add to that the Epstein photographs, undeniable and damning. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. And the royal family faces more than embarrassment. This is about legacy, integrity, and whether the institution can confront a deeply flawed chapter in its own history, or whether silence will again win out over accountability. For most people, losing your job over a necktie sounds absurd. But for those who worked under Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, the Duke of York, it was allegedly just another day in a palace ruled by whims. Nylon instead of silk? That could be it. A mole on your face that didn't sit right with him? Too bad. Staff weren't just expected to be professional, they were expected to submit, sometimes in ways that strayed far from standard royal protocol and into the territory of humiliating rituals. And nothing summed that up more than the alleged bowing. Former aides say Andrew insisted that staff bow to him, not in the formal, ceremonial sense. In daily life, in hallways, in private moments where no audience was watching. And when someone didn't meet the invisible, ever-changing standard, there were consequences, not minor corrections, punishments, firings, cold shoulders, reprimand designed to reinforce exactly who held the power in the room. These weren't isolated reports. The accounts have resurfaced repeatedly, each time echoing the same themes: control, manipulation, punishment, and a toxic workplace culture behind closed doors at one of the most visible institutions in the world. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. And even though Andrew has been stripped of his public titles and official duties, these stories aren't fading, they're gathering strength. Because people are still talking. And now, they have more to point to. Recent photographs showing Andrew with Jeffrey Epstein have poured gasoline on a fire that never really died down. These aren't distant, public appearances from years ago. They are intimate, personal images, captured in private settings, that directly contradict the Duke's previous denials and defenses. They suggest not only an ongoing association with a convicted sex offender, but a level of comfort that flies in the face of his public. So while Andrew quietly appears at family events like a granddaughter's christening, slipping in and out without cameras or commentary, those images, and the allegations that accompany them, are impossible to shake off. The contrast between Andrew's subdued public life and the stories that continue to follow him is impossible to ignore. On the surface, he's a royal stripped of duties, no longer front and center. But behind the scenes, his name still drags behind it a trail of scandal, secrecy, and unanswered questions. The Epstein connection didn't go away. It resurfaced with visuals. And those visuals don't just tell one story. They deepen every other allegation that's been made about him. His behavior toward palace staff, according to multiple insiders, wasn't just demanding. It was deeply controlling. Some described it as erratic, others oppressive. One theme persisted. Andrew created an atmosphere where obedience wasn't expected. It was enforced. He used rituals. He used fear. And most disturbingly, he reportedly used his position not to inspire loyalty, but to demand submission. This version of Andrew, the one staff experience, isn't the one seen on royal tours or in carefully curated media clips. It's the one spoken of in hushed tones, the one revealed through testimony. And as those stories gain traction, the gap between Andrew's public image and private behavior becomes impossible to ignore. According to the rise and fall of the House of York, the controlling atmosphere Andrew created didn't happen in a vacuum. It was enabled, protected, reinforced by a system built on hierarchy, secrecy, and unquestioned privilege. No one told him no. Not really. And when someone did, they were replaced. That's how a man allegedly gets away with disciplining staff over wardrobe fabrics and facial features. And what did the palace do? For years, decades, even, it said nothing. The strategy was always the same. Hold a line. Deny comment. Let the news cycle move on. And to some extent, that worked. Until it didn't. Because now, we're in a different era. The public has seen behind the curtain. And the more they hear about Andrew's behind-the-scenes behavior, the less willing they are to accept that silence. The Epstein photos reignited public fury, but it's the treatment of staff, the stories from people who worked under him day after day, that turned this from scandal to indictment. It's one thing to be careless in your associations. It's another to run your household like a dictatorship. And yet, with all this information, so many stories, so much testimony, what's been the response from Buckingham Palace? Nothing. No official statement. No inquiry. No meaningful acknowledgement. And that silence is a cost. Because every time Andrew is quietly reintroduced, whether it's walking into a family event or showing up at a low-profile appearance, it sends a message that accountability might apply to some, but not all. That losing titles is the extent of the punishment. That public memory is short. But it's not. The people who once served him still remember. The public still remembers. And every time these stories are validated by a new witness, by a new report, by another round of resurfaced images, the story becomes less about Andrew as an individual and more about what the monarchy has allowed to go unchallenged. Sarah Ferguson, for her part, has stood by him. Her loyalty is unwavering. But even that loyalty can't erase the emotional toll. Those close to the pair have reportedly felt the strain. Public disgrace, media scrutiny, and the weight of unending controversy take their toll, not just reputationally, but mentally and emotionally. This is a human cost of unresolved scandal. And it hasn't just affected Andrew. It's affected everyone in his orbit. So what now? Does the monarchy continue its strategy of calculated silence, hoping that if Andrew stays in the background, the noise will eventually fade? Or does it finally confront the reality that these allegations, combined with the visual evidence, have permanently altered how people view not just Andrew, but the institution that gave him power in the first place? Because this is no longer just about him. It's about what's tolerated behind palace walls. It's about how long loyalty and legacy can be used as shields against consequence. It's about whether the royal family can evolve, or whether they'll double down on the same strategies that no longer work. Public sentiment is shifting. The younger generations don't revere titles. They value accountability. They don't want curated apologies. They want real answers. And until they get them, Andrew's presence, even if it's quiet, will remain a reminder of a scandal still unresolved. The question now isn't whether Andrew will return to public life. That ship has sailed. The real question is whether the monarchy will ever address the environment that allowed this behavior to fester, and whether they are prepared to do the uncomfortable work of owning their role in it. So what do you think? Are the palace's silence and subtle reintegrations just damage control, or are they hoping we all forget? Should Andrew face a public reckoning for what insiders have described? Or will this, like so many royal controversies, just drift quietly into the background until the next headline forces everyone to remember all over again? Drop a comment with your thoughts. Hit like if you think royal accountability shouldn't be optional. And if you want to keep following the stories they hope we ignore, subscribe, because behind the royal titles, there's always another story waiting to be told. There's a certain chill that comes with stories like these, not just because of the allegations themselves, but because of the silence they are met with. It's one thing for Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, the Duke of York, to allegedly demand bowing rituals and issue bizarre punishments over personal quirks. It's another for those around him, inside the most powerful royal institution on earth, to say nothing. Again, and again, and again. That's the part that sticks. The refusal to speak. The blank space where accountability should be. What we're left with is a very modern kind of scandal, one that isn't just about bad behavior, but about what that behavior reveals, what it exposes, what it confirms about power behind closed palace doors. Because Andrew's alleged insistence on daily bows and humiliating discipline for minor infractions wasn't about tradition, it was about dominance. And no one, not colleagues, not aides, not the institution itself, stepped in to stop it. How does someone develop that kind of environment unless they are absolutely sure no one will challenge them? Former staff have described working under Andrew as walking a tightrope. The rules change depending on his mood. The expectations weren't written down. They were enforced verbally, emotionally, and sometimes with abrupt dismissals. One person gets called out for wearing the wrong tie. Another loses their position over something as petty as a mole. And in the middle of it all, a royal who allegedly treated palace life like his own private court. The kind of behavior being described wasn't eccentricity. It was control. And the way that control was reportedly exerted, ritualistic, arbitrary, punitive, suggests that Andrew didn't just want obedience. He wanted submission. That's a through line in all of this. Unchecked power, cultivated in an environment that rewarded deference and punished dissent. And while this may have simmered in palace corridors for years, the story refuses to stay hidden anymore. Not when former aides are speaking up. Not when books like The Rise and Fall of the House of York put names, dates, and patterns together. Not when those damning photos of Andrew with Jeffrey Epstein keep surfacing again and again. Because the Epstein connection doesn't just hurt Andrew's image, it reinforces a central theme of this entire scandal, a disturbing belief that consequences are for other people. When those photos first emerged, they caused shock. But over time, as they continued to resurface, they began to feel symbolic, not just of Andrew's poor judgment, but of his perceived immunity. He could be photographed casually spending time with one of the most notorious criminals of the century and still walk in and out of royal events with no explanation, no apology, no real reckoning. That's what the public sees. And more importantly, that's what they remember. There was a disastrous 2019 interview with the BBC. The insistence that he couldn't have done certain things because he doesn't sweat. The bizarre claims. The smirking, evasive answers. It wasn't just a PR failure. It was a window into Andrew's mindset, one that seemed completely detached from the weight of the allegations and the seriousness of the moment. After that, he was removed from public duties. Titles were returned, roles stripped, but in practice, he wasn't gone. He wasn't held accountable in any meaningful sense. He remained inside royal residences, continued receiving protection, attended private family events, slipped into the background, but never truly exited. Which brings us back to the present, when new sightings of Andrew, however quiet, reignite the outrage every time. Because it's not just about him anymore. It's about what it says that is still there. That after everything, he's still close to the core of an institution that claims to represent duty, integrity, and service. And then there's Sarah Ferguson, who's remained publicly loyal through it all. Her defense of Andrew has never wavered, even as the controversy has deepened. But standing by someone doesn't negate the damage they may have caused. Her loyalty might be personal, emotional, but it doesn't erase the stories of staff who say they were mistreated. It doesn't change the fact that insiders have painted a consistent picture of a man who allegedly ruled through fear, not leadership. The emotional toll of these scandals has been immense, not just for Andrew and Sarah, but for everyone forced to live in the shadow of royal disgrace. Their inner circle, their staff, even their family members. The constant media pressure, the whispers, the isolation, it's all compounded by the palace's refusal to address anything head-on. And let's be honest, the public isn't buying the strategy anymore. For decades, the monarchy relied on its mystique, the idea that discretion and dignity were the same thing. But the modern media landscape doesn't play by those rules. It moves fast. It demands transparency. And when stories like Andrew stay unresolved, they only become more toxic with time. The question now is no longer what happened. It's why hasn't anything been done? The allegations are out there. The photographic evidence is out there. The testimonies are stacking up. And yet the palace holds the line, issuing no response. It's a strategy that might have worked in the past. But in this climate, it looks like cowardice. Worse, it looks like complicity. What does it say when the people at the top of an institution show more concern for preserving appearances and protecting the people who work for them? What does it say when a royal accused of demanding daily bows and punishing staff over dress codes can still attend family events, even in secret? It says the system is broken. And while the royal family continues to act as if distance from Andrew is enough, the public continues to notice that no real accountability has ever been delivered. No formal investigation. No official review, just removal from public view, as if that's justice. But justice isn't silence. Justice isn't waiting for the public to forget. Justice is action. And right now, all we're getting is a closed curtain and the hope that the scandal will die of exhaustion. It won't, because too much damage has already been done. The royal brand, already under pressure to prove its relevance, is now tied to a scandal that won't fade. And Andrew's continued presence, however minimal, sends a message that behavior like his doesn't come with real consequences. That's why this still matters. Not because Andrew is likely to return to royal duties, but because his story is a test case, a litmus test for whether the monarchy is capable of evolving, of holding itself to account, of living up to the standards they expect the public to believe in. And so far, the results aren't encouraging. The palace's refusal to comment on anything might be strategic, but silence, in this case, is speaking volumes. It says, "We see what you see. We're just not going to talk about it." And that, in 2025, doesn't work anymore. Not with a public that's watching. Not with a media that doesn't forget. And not with former staff who are done being silent. The longer this goes on, the more obvious it becomes. This isn't just about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. It never really was. Yes, he's at the center of the storm, but the real damage isn't just in his alleged actions. It's in how thoroughly the system around him refused to act. You have former palace aides saying they were ordered to bow to a man who had already lost the respect that gesture was supposed to symbolize. You have reports of people being punished over moles and ties. These aren't rumors whispered in shadows. These are patterns, laid out, documented, repeated. And yet the institution that gave Andrew his platform, his protection, and his power, still silent. And silence, at this stage, isn't neutral. It's complicit. Think about the way the scandal keeps looping back into the public eye. It's never just one story, one photo, one outburst. It's an accumulation. First, the behavior. Then, the Epstein photos. Then, the shocking details from Andrew Lowe's rise and fall of the House of York, putting the full scope of the dysfunction into words that can't be spun or softened. And every time it seems like we've hit the low point, something new pulls it all back into focus. The private photographs of Andrew with Jeffrey Epstein, in relaxed, familiar settings, didn't just revive an old controversy, they lit a fresh fire under everything that came before. Suddenly, the stories about entitlement, about unchecked control, about the way he treated his staff, they all made more sense. Because this wasn't a man who slipped up once. This was a man allegedly living in a sustained state of entitlement, free from scrutiny and protected by centuries of royal insulation. And while public roles were revoked, duties stripped, medals returned. Let's not kid ourselves. The core of the issue was never dealt with. The structure stayed intact. Andrew wasn't held accountable. He was tucked away. He and Sarah Ferguson were spotted at a christening not long ago. A brief appearance, timed to avoid headlines, executed with military-grade discretion. In and out. No comments. No photo ops. Just enough to remind everyone. He's still here. Still part of the family, just not part of the story the monarchy wants to tell. But here's the problem with pretending a scandal doesn't exist. People will fill in the silence. And the silence from Buckingham Palace? Deafening. The institution's refusal to publicly acknowledge or investigate the repeated allegations against Andrew sends a very clear message, one that's starting to cost them daily. They've staked their legacy on tradition, on formality, on the idea that discretion equals dignity. But when that discretion begins to look like denial, when it's used not to protect victims or truth, but to protect the powerful from consequences, it starts to crumble. There's a reason trust in the monarchy is on shaky ground. Because scandals like this don't just hurt Andrew, they damage the entire royal brand. They show that behind the polished photos, the family dynamics, and the royal engagements is a system still stuck in the past. One that protects status over justice, appearance over action. Andrew's reported behavior isn't some misunderstood eccentricity. It's been described as calculated, petty, authoritarian. Staff didn't just feel disrespected. They felt afraid. And when they tried to navigate the rules, they found those rules were constantly shifting. That obedience wasn't enough. That perfection wasn't enough. That deference wasn't enough. What does it say when the only stable thing in a royal household is the unpredictability of the man in charge? That kind of environment doesn't develop overnight. It grows slowly, under layers of privilege, behind the safety net of protocol. And the longer it's left alone, the more dangerous it becomes. Because when no one is willing to intervene, to question, to challenge, you get exactly what insiders have described, a culture ruled not by leadership, but by fear. And it's that fear, combined with Andrew's refusal to address anything publicly, that keeps this scandal from fading. Every time he shows up, even in private, the royal family risks reminding the public of everything they refuse to confront. Every time he's seen without an apology, without a reckoning, they confirm the suspicion that it's not just Andrew who's untouchable, but the entire system that shielded him. Sarah Ferguson's loyalty may be personal, but it doesn't exist in a vacuum. She's tied herself to this narrative. And while she's certainly not responsible for his actions, her continued defense contributes to the palace's overall refusal to reflect, to respond, to change. And change is exactly what people want. We're no longer in an era where royal status guarantees respect. That respect now has to be owned. And the way the monarchy handles Andrew's legacy will determine whether they're capable of earning it. Because this isn't just a scandal, it's a test. A test of how much the public will tolerate. A test of whether modern accountability can exist inside a centuries-old institution. A test of whether silence still works in the age of receipts. And let's be clear, the receipts are piling up. So the question remains, will the royal family continue to hide behind tradition? Or will they finally realize that protecting Andrew isn't just hurting their image, it's hurting the institution itself? Because the longer this story goes unanswered, the louder the demand for answers becomes. What do you think? Should the palace issue a formal response to these allegations? Will we ever see real consequences beyond public removal? Or has the institution already made peace with burying it all? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. If you think accountability matters more than reputation management, hit like. And if you're here to keep the pressure on the stories they hope will disappear, subscribe, because this isn't over. Not by a long shot.